Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I'm David Blockstein, the Bard College in New York. I am the co-director of our Solve Climate by 2030 project and our Worldwide Climate and Justice Education Week. This is our one of our weekly webinars. We have them every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And we are doing this to build community as well as to inform people. And so that's why one of the reasons why we wanted to give people a chance to introduce themselves so that we can better get connected with each other. The Worldwide Climate and Justice Education Week is something we've been building each year. This is our sixth year in the project, and we have um, it's part of what we call coordinated climate change education. So basically, trying to get people to do what they could and should do every day, which is to educate people about climate change, climate solutions, and climate justice. But by having a particular time period, just like Earth Day, that people are maybe more likely to do something during that period of time. So we have ideas on things that you could do, but it's up to you. You can organize whatever works best for yourselves and your community. So there's two different flavors. One is what we call Make Climate an Event, and that's organizing events at your college or university or other educational institution or just in your community. And the other, you can see we're very creative in our names. It's called Make Climate a Class, and that's to take class time to reach students who might not come to events and to show them that whether you're in industrial design or environmental science or English or art or whatever, psychology, whatever else, that you have a role and we need you to be part of um, the team working on climate repair and climate justice. And so that's our purpose here. We also, this year, last year, we discovered, not a big surprise, but a lot of people use games to teach and learn about climate change and climate issues. And so this year, we're having the first Worldwide Climate and Justice Education Games Day. It's taking place on Friday, April 11. And so this is a day where you are encouraged to play games. And we've had a couple of webinars about that, and we have on our website, which Paula can put into the chat, we have um, a list of games and a database and various other things in terms of games and resources. So one of the our goals with this is the energetic with from New York City Atlas. Yeah, we had presentations on that, and actually, right, you were part of Richard's podcast on that. Yes, so yeah, we all are working in community and sharing. So um, what we one of our purposes in this whole project of climate change education, we say it's helping students to move from climate despair to climate repair. That in our view, that action is a way of creating hope and an antidote to despair. And so, we're trying to reach as many students as we can. And certainly, for those of you who are students, we do want to hear from you tonight. And also, we encourage you to organize things at Fresno State. Maybe the class that you're in, you might be able to do something special during that week. So I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful presenters, Kate Schapira and Carolyn McGrath. They are both educators and Kate in English and Carolyn in the arts. And they have together, well, here's their descriptors here. So um, they are part of a group that we work with called the Climate Psychology Alliance. And last year they put together, along with others, a wonderful publication, An Educator's Guide to Climate Emotions. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate and Carolyn to give us a presentation, and then we'll have opportunities for interaction. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, David. I'm Carolyn, and
yeah, and I'm Kate.
This is Kate, and we're so thrilled that you could be here with us.
One of the things that we like to do at the beginning of these times is to ask people to note what native land they are inhabiting right now. The people who evolved with the landscape that we're on often have a lot to say about how to live well with it. And we can, if we are from those lineages, we can learn from them. And if we're not from those lineages, we can also learn from them. There's a link to a map right up here, and you can check it out if you don't already know where you're calling in from, whose lands are you on, and what else do you know about them. I can say that I personally, I am from, well, actually, Carolyn, you're next for yours, right? But yeah, just throw it in the chat. Take a second to look it up while we tell you about where we're from.
Feel free, Kate. We could jump to you first if you like.
Okay, cool. So I'm on Narragansett land, in mostly Narragansett, although Wampanoag people, Nipmuc people, Pokanoket people have all traveled through this land and lived here sometimes, and are still living here today. They are cooking food, they are holding meetings, they are surviving as a tribe, they are fishing and doing shell fishing, clamming, cohogging. And they are also learning together. That last slide, that last picture there is a Narragansett Cultural Summer School, which they have down in the southern part of the state near the water. So yeah, definitely like a living and thriving people in the place that I live also. Yeah, I'm seeing.
Oops, sorry. And I will just, oh, go ahead, Kate.
How are you?
So I am coming in from Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral lands of the Lenape people. And I just want to acknowledge, like he did, that the Lenape people, or the indigenous people, are still here. They are still practicing traditions, and we have a lot to learn from them. And I personally, in terms of Lenape-Hoking, or what's called New Jersey, have been learning more about Lenape traditions and their relationship to the land. And I think, I'm just reiterating essentially what Kate said, that we have quite a bit to learn about our relationship and reciprocity.
Yeah, and if you didn't know this, okay, lots of people don't know it. But this is a chance to check it out and to kind of see what has been going on, and to add to your historical knowledge of who's been living with the lands that you share. And we're going to be getting a little bit more deeply into why that matters to this work in particular a little later on in the conversation.
So just shifting gears, we're going to be talking about some topics that are difficult. I'm sure that none of these topics are necessarily foreign to you, but I just want to pause to take a moment to take a few deep breaths. And if you could, if you're comfortable, close your eyes, take a deep inhale and exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And when I do this with my students, I should have maybe done this with you. I also sometimes do a stretch with this. It's nice to pair this with movement if you're working with young people. So you can do inhale and exhale. And inhale and exhale, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for trying that with us.
Mhm.
It's not always our habit to do stuff like that. So it can sometimes feel kind of weird to build it in. But it's recommended for all the reasons that Carolyn said. So how are young people feeling about climate change? But also, and this is one of the things that I mentioned when I was inviting people to come to this, about the situation in general that is going on. A lot of the methods that we're talking about can apply to any major disruption, to any state of fear or threat that people are living under. So as we talk about climate impacts, let's also be thinking about the other kinds of disruptions to which we might find that we or our students or both are exposed, and the conditions that under which we're trying to learn. Next one. So extreme weather events disrupted school for 242 million kids in 85 countries last year. That's a number that like not all of us can imagine. I can't. I don't know what 242 million children means. I know it's a lot, but it's enough to indicate that this is something that is widespread, that is real, that it is happening everywhere. And as we know from some of the disasters this year, is not necessarily something that you can predict. Next one. Obviously, direct experiences with all of these disasters are going to cause significant and disruption and distress for children and young adults. And one of the things that you may have found, both for yourself and for the people that you work with or know, because of how much news we have access to every day, we're all experiencing these events vicariously, even if we are not experiencing them in our lives. It's not even, it's not every event, it's not all the time, but it's very likely that you're hearing something about something happening to someone somewhere, even if it's not happening to you or someone you know. So this study is from 2021, so time has passed since then, but they talked with 10,000 youth and found that 3/4 of them found the future frightening. Over half of them believed that humanity is doomed, and over half of them experienced feeling sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and guilty. These are kids.
And Kate, if you don't mind me interrupting, I just wanted to mention the artwork in this presentation is from my students as well. Recent artwork. Yeah.
89% of the teens interviewed is a lot of people. More worried than hopeful is a lot of worry. I think that we cite these statistics mostly to affirm the impression that I think a lot of us are getting when we talk to our students, which is that people are afraid. These are quotes from young people, paired also with art from young people. Climate change is something that leaves me scared about the future of the planet, as well as my generation and humanity itself. That person's 14. Molly's also 14. It's frustrating to see people in positions of power not doing anything to try to solve the climate crisis. Zaid is 16 and is citing a sense of fear paired with a sense of hope. And we're going to talk about that as well. Just because what we're hearing a lot of is emotions that are difficult and painful to experience, doesn't mean that we can assume what people are feeling or that there's not other impressions that people are getting or other ways that students are engaging with the situation of the world. Okay, so this is obviously the $64,000 question, right? What can educators do to support students? This is what we're here to learn, either as educators or as students, possibly also as parents or people who work with young people in other capacities. So here are some of the things. We can recognize common climate emotions, and we're going to walk through all of these things briefly. We can understand the disproportionate impacts. Who's getting hurt first? Who's getting hurt worst? Why is that happening? How does it interact with other things that are happening? We can create space for people's climate feelings. Why do you feel like this? What's going on? We can let students know crucially that others care. This is the beginning of what Deborah's talking about in the chat here, right? Teaching people that there are mitigation and adaptation strategies that we can take to create inclusive transitions to a sustainable future. For that to happen, we have to be like, hey, other people care about this. We're working on this. It matters. And the next step for that is channeling emotions into action, right? What actions can people take, even very young people, to help build toward that sustainable future? And then finally, integrating Indigenous knowledge, as we were talking about before. And again, we'll get more in depth about how and why and when to do that toward the end of the piece. And finally, of course, care for ourselves and each other. We make the future that we want out of the present that we're in, and care is a big part of that. All right, Carolyn, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kate. So, step one is to recognize some of the things that might show up commonly in a classroom. And I will just say, just referring back to those quotes that Kate was reading, those were from my students paired with the artwork. It's not like students are going to come to class and say, hey, I feel despair, or hey, I feel this. So there's sort of what's going on the surface, and then there's the emotions that are underneath. And we know that those emotions exist both based on the research, but I mean, anecdotally, just whenever I ask my students to share through artwork, through writing, a lot of emotions come through. So we're going to talk about what are some of those feelings that show up. Probably the most common term that folks have heard of is eco-anxiety, which is the sort of umbrella term for all of these different climate emotions. And it's defined as the chronic fear of environmental doom, but it can really be used more broadly to refer to what we call climate emotions. So what are some of the climate emotions? I'm just going to sort of throw them out at you, and you might think some of them contradict each other. Well, that's sort of how emotions are. They sort of exist in a space and they don't necessarily make sense. So fear is a strong one. Grief, sadness, grief, anger. There's the research that Kate cited talked a lot about feelings of anger towards older generations for not taking action, anger at people in power for not doing more faster. A feeling of powerlessness, especially for young people who are, considerably less powerful. A feeling of overwhelm, not knowing what to do. loneliness, a feeling of being alone with these feelings. And when I said nobody comes to class and just sort of uh, communicates all of these feelings, I think that contributes to some in some way to that sense of loneliness, that we're not comfortable talking about climate emotions or emotions in general. Frustration, just irritation. Why are we in this situation? Guilt, our own, the ways that we're implicated in the problem, that the problems that we're facing. Solastalgia is a new term, which neologism, which refers to a sadness for places that no longer exist. And especially if you're older, you can think of the ways that perhaps seasons, for example, look different, or places that you once knew look different. Betrayal, again, there's that sense of, I talked about anger before, and betrayal by people who should be taking care of young people. But then there's also these, what we would consider positive feelings, like motivation, a feeling of wanting to do something, feelings of hopefulness, of maybe we can turn things around, or maybe we can take action, and a feeling of optimism or efficacy, that there's something that can be done. So that's not all of the climate emotions, but those are some of the ones that you might see. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the disproportionate impacts, both of climate anxiety and of the sources of that anxiety, the things that are happening in the world. One of the disproportions is just that people who are young now will have to live longer with more disasters, systemic strains, and stresses, heat waves, droughts, crop failures, river floods, wildfires, and this doesn't even get into things like coastal flooding for people who live by the shore. Children are also more mentally and physically at risk of climate change impacts. Their bodies are often more fragile. They need nutrition in a different way. They need sleep in a different way. They suffer more from heat and cold. So those are all things that are just true, no matter which kid it is. But also, not all young people experience impacts of climate change equally, any more than they experience other things equally. Climate change is known as a threat multiplier, meaning that it interacts with the other things that threaten people's health and well-being to make them worse. People who live on the front lines of climate change, like the shore or like a wildfire area, and then also people who live in what's called fence line communities, people who live near fossil fuel extraction sites or processing sites, people who live near fracking, people who live near oil processing. Often there's a lot of overlap there with vulnerable groups, people of color, Indigenous people, Black people, people with disabilities, people with various queer identities, and people who have migrated to this country, right? All of those things cross and cross and cross in what's become known as intersectional oppression, and climate impacts are just another multiplier of those oppressions. So those, and the reason, by the way, the reason that we talk about that is because if you or your students are undergoing these disproportionate impacts, the strategies that you may decide to use are going to change, right? If a ton of your kids in your class are dealing with asthma already, the conversation that you might have about climate and environmental impacts with them is going to be different than if they're people who are afraid, but who are physically mostly doing well.
Thanks, Kate. So the next thing that we want to talk about is how to create space for climate feelings. So we know that these feelings exist among students in the classroom, and what can we do to create some space for those? This is the Climate Emotions Wheel. It was created by the Anya Kamenetz from the Climate Mental Health Network. It's based on research from Panu Piccola's research about climate emotions. And it's just a really wonderful illustration of some of the emotions that people typically feel when it comes to climate change. I went to a workshop with Climate Mental Health Network and they gave out these cards, and I just have them on my desk, and students will pull them out frequently when we're talking about climate emotions, because for some it really helps to like point at something. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's an emojis wheel, there's different ways of sort of identifying using the wheel what you feel. There's one way that Climate Mental Health Network has that you can download. It's for free, and it's just a blank climate emotions wheel. So you can download that, have students fill it out, they can color it out. So that's a really simple way to create space. Some other options, and these are things that work well also, is collaborative word clouds. You can do this online. Kids can type in the words that they're feeling and it generates a word cloud, and that's really kind of an interesting activity to do, where it's sort of anonymous and it kind of generates which are the feelings that are occurring the most. I've done this before with Post-its. So you have people write down their top emotions on Post-it notes and then kind of stick them on a wall and group them according to types of feelings. Artwork, obviously, I do a lot of that in my classes. There's a lot of ways to use art to communicate climate feelings. I'm an art teacher, Kate's a writing teacher, so writing prompts also, and not even as an art teacher, I find writing prompts really get to the heart of things. Art communicates stuff, but writing also in collaboration with it also helps students put their emotions in a physical form. And then if you can take that and use that to create small group discussion, that's excellent. And I've done that with students as well. Another way that you can make space for climate emotions is to read a story, especially with young people. In our Educator's Guide to Climate Emotions, there's lots of recommendations for books. So you could read, if it's working with younger people, you could read a story, and then you could talk about what you think that character feels, or what would you feel if you were that character. Same thing with a video. So it's sort of a little bit removed, but it also can help young people or older young people explore what they're feeling. Another thing that teachers can do is called toggling. And what it is essentially you don't want to overwhelm people with too much bad info all at once. So a lot of people say, oh, climate change is doom and gloom. Well, yeah, the reality is some of it is, but what you can do is you can kind of touch base on the tough information, and then you can touch base on things that are soothing or calming. So some of those activities might include the breath work that we did in the beginning, including some stretching, movement, embodiment, somatic activities, some kind of movement. We already talked about creative expression, contemplative, like meditative type practices. Connecting with other people, just talking is a huge way to sort of bring you back into your body and help you process what's difficult information. Connecting with nature is also very soothing. Thinking about joy, gratitude, opportunities for self-care. So all of these kind of going back and forth. So you're not sort of staying with the really tough stuff. You're sort of going back, forth, and that can help to integrate the information and sustain people, both ourselves and our students. And Kate, go for it.
So with all of this, you also have to be making space for your own climate feelings. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is you are also a person, right? You have feelings, whatever they also deserve attention, just as the feelings of your students or your fellow learners do. The other reason is that you can model having these feelings for your students, right? You can be like, here's some ways to deal with this that don't 100% suck. And finally, there's a quote from Thomas Merton that I sometimes bring up when I'm talking with people about climate, which is, if you bring forth what's inside you, what you bring forth can save you. If you don't bring forth what's inside you, what you bring forth can destroy you. And the idea there is that, like, if you feel something strongly, it's going to come out whether you want it to or not. The part that you have agency about is how it comes out, how it emerges, and how you share it with others. So I'm going to ask folks to think a little bit and write a little bit. When you think about the climate crisis, what are some of the feelings that come up for you? I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes to write those things down. You can write them in the chat, or you can write them on a paper if you don't care to share them. I do think that there's a value, as I said, in seeing what other people are feeling, and to know that you're not alone with that feeling. And remember that, like, they don't have to be any kind of thing. Feelings are inside you. You don't owe any feeling to anybody. If you feel numb, you can say that or not. If you feel angry, you can say that or not. But maybe try to throw 3 or 5 feelings on a paper or into the chat. And maybe let's look at this emotions wheel for a minute again, to talk about how we're feeling, if it helps to label using the emotions that you see here. So let's just take a few minutes, like 2 minutes. I can start us off to show you. So if you're willing, and remember that your sharing can be a gift to someone else also. So nostalgia, anger, sadness, active hope, feeling frustrated, alarmed, and sad. Thank you both for sharing those. What else we got? Helplessness. Yeah, I feel that sometimes too. Folks willing to share. Hope, frustration, anxiety, motivated, disappointment. Yep, for sure. So nostalgia, that longing for how a place used to be, lucky and empowered and energized, and also worried. Those things for sure can coexist. Incredulous at the havoc a few people are causing. Listen, we could spend the rest of the time here talking about that. Feeling protective, empathy meets outrage. Love that. A little more space for people to put up with their feeling. Stubbornness. Yeah, hell yeah. Screw them. Frustration and anger and confusion and fear and motivation and love for the planet. All of that. Another minute, maybe, to add what you're thinking or feeling. You can also continue as we go along. And I encourage people, yes, Scott, also all of this, my friends and I were calling it the clusterfuck era. How is this going to interact with the other strains that people are already experiencing? So as we go on a little bit, you can also notice how you're feeling as we continue to talk, right? Like, I love Tim's exercise with the emotion wheel that you shared earlier, Tim. I thought that was terrific because it's something that we can kind of notice as we go along. Are our emotions staying in the same place as we have this discussion? Are they shifting at all? Where are they shifting to? Yep, discouragement, angry, outraged, powerless, but also having a community to work side by side with. Thank you for sharing these. I hope that as people's eyes kind of go up and down the chat, you're seeing some resonance with some of the stuff that you're feeling, or some complementary emotions to the stuff that you're feeling, and that is a little less lonely, maybe. That would be my hope. Carolyn, back to you.
I love that exercise of changing the pins because it's a different cluster of emotions on any given day at any given time of any day. Um, so that's important to know for us, but also important to know for our students. So I think this exercise of like looking inward, as Kate was saying, can be a source of strength for us, right? So we can have greater empathy for our students, and we can say that we're there alongside them. And so this particular section, we're talking about letting students know that other people care. Because I think, just based on the small sampling of my students, a lot of them think that nobody cares. And so I think communicating that actually people do care, that these are issues that people are working on, is can really transform things for students. So there's something called what's referred to as the spiral of silence, and it's essentially because nobody talks about climate change, nobody feels comfortable talking about climate change, and then people feel isolated in their feelings about climate change, and so on. There you have the spiral. So breaking the spiral of silence is a really powerful act because it goes against those existing social norms of like, we shouldn't talk about it, it's taboo, etc. And so talking about this with students may give them a great sense of relief, as well as, kind of connecting with other students, sharing climate emotions in whatever way you do, or sharing your own climate emotions selectively with students. It really communicates that they're not alone. Another thing that can also communicate to students the bigger picture, at least in the US, a lot of people think, oh, nobody cares about climate change. And some of that is because a lot of people don't talk about climate change, or the media is always sort of doing these false equivalencies between deniers and climate scientists, essentially. And so, the perception is nobody cares, or really nobody cares, nobody's doing anything about climate change. So the Yale program on climate change communication has been studying Americans' perceptions about global warming for quite a while. And it's very interesting to see the trends have gone towards increasing numbers of concerned, alarmed on that end of the spectrum. But it's really interesting to note, this was from 2023, but it's really interesting to note that the dismissive group is quite small. And I think that we think of them as being much bigger, mostly because they have quite a big voice on the national stage, especially now. Another thing to communicate to, thanks for the visuals, Kate. Another thing to communicate to students is that regardless of political parties, regardless of what the president is saying, the majority of Americans support government action on climate change. So communicating that also can help with that level of frustration and so on, and helping them feel more connected to others.
So this is where we get into some of the stuff that that Deborah's been talking about in the chat. Once you feel these things, once you label these things in yourself, recognize these things in yourself, once you affirm and recognize them in other people, you now have an opportunity to channel emotions into action. And you already know that there's at least one person who's going to maybe take that action with you because you've been having a conversation about it together. So that connection step is an important one, not just because it affirms us in how we feel, but because it has an opportunity for us to act together. So you can talk with people, including students, about how solutions are already being implemented locally, regionally, and globally. Again, this is what Deborah was talking about a moment ago. There are a lot of people who are already working on this. Where are they? What are they doing? What kinds of skills are they working at? What's going on? And can we study these methods that they're using and how they're working in the same way that we might study some of the impacts that we're facing and the causes of those impacts? Another thing that this is my personal jam and possibly the jam of many here. I often find that when people talk about climate solutions, both grown-ups and kids, the perception that they have is of stuff that they can do at the level of their household, which is great. All for that, go for it. And the more people who do it, the more of an impact it has. But I think it is also useful, especially for students, to emphasize the things that we can do together. So you can participate in the world in a more healthy, kind, and sustainable way by riding your bike to school. You can also think about who else could be doing that? How could I make it easier for other people to do that? What are some ways that people are already making it easier for other people to do that? So thinking about, hey, every Friday or whatever, we're going to try to help people bike rather than drive in the car to school. And we're going to get so many of us together that we actually are safe from cars because we're all riding en masse. Something that's useful if you live in a place that doesn't have a lot of great bike infrastructure. So that's also a way to get people thinking, hey, what if we all went to the city council and yelled at them about getting better bike infrastructure so that more people could then take a ride together? These are photos from Carolyn's town. This is a real thing that really happened in the real state of New Jersey, which is amazing in so many ways. Another thing that we can do, and again, this is something that both has a genuine material benefit and increases people's sense of agency and their ability to care for one another. Schools can also help students prepare for extreme weather events and build community resilience. In a lot of places, including Warren, Rhode Island, where I do a lot of my work, the school is the shelter. It's the place where people would go if there was a hurricane or if there was some other extreme weather event. They would get people to gather in the shelter, in the school as a shelter. So they can be literally a community hub where everybody can be. It can also be a part of doing and sharing the practices that Carolyn was sharing earlier, right? Like, how can the school be a place where people learn how to accompany one another in difficult feelings and calm one another down in a situation of real emergency, right? If you're freaking out, it helps to have somebody close by to you who knows how to be present with somebody who is freaking out. And kids can learn to do that. Even little kids can learn to do that. So these are skills that we can share with our students and with the other young folks in our lives, and helping people, as Nancy's saying in the chat, thinking about how we build a movement together, how we act together, how we see one another as peers, as friends, as resources, as companions. These are all things that we can practice in our classrooms.
And I just wanted to say that with regards to helping kids prep, I can't multitask, so I can't share the slides and look up links. But subject to climate and ready.gov have a lot of really good resources for lessons for helping kids prepare. But I can't both show the slides and look stuff up, so I'll have to do that after. So in the beginning, we did a land acknowledgement, and we want to just take a moment to just dig a little bit deeper into that. Indigenous people have been on the forefront both of land protection, but also fighting against fossil fuel infrastructure. So I think, you know, non-Indigenous people have plenty to learn there. Indigenous people only make up a small percentage of the global population, but they have proven over millennia that they know how to protect the planet's biodiversity. This was an interesting thing. It's not in our educator's guide, but as of 2021, Indigenous resistance to pipelines and other fossil fuel projects prevented 12% of US and Canadian CO2 emissions. So Indigenous sovereignty itself is a climate solution. Those are adaptable water protectors. So thinking, you know, from the perspective of educators, what are ways that we can respectfully integrate traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, into our teaching, incorporating first-person perspectives, Indigenous perspectives into what we're teaching? How can we help students cultivate relationships of reciprocity with the natural world? And you know, this is a delicate relationship because we don't want to be appropriating, but we want to be learning from and partnering with local Indigenous groups. And that was sort of, you know, when we did our land acknowledgement, it really should not stop at the land acknowledgement. It should, that's the starting point for partnership and development of relationships. And I'll pass this last part to Kate.
All right, so this is my other jam, which is care for ourselves and each other, right? How does that work? Roberta, thanks for being with us for the time that you were able. So how does that work, right? What does that actually look like? I mentioned it when we were talking about disaster preparedness. We noted that that can include these forms of caring for ourselves and each other, learning how to be with somebody who's having a hard time, either because there's a present emergency or because they're anticipating an emergency. Here are some other opportunities for that kind of care. You can have climate cafes. Those are often run by somebody who has some training, but you can also just start one. You can say, here is going to be a time when we all get together and talk about this stuff. Learning more about climate emotions, as we've been doing. There's more and more to learn, lots of great resources. Processing your own feelings, using some of the methods that we talked about to work with students, using art, using movement, can all be ways of kind of handling and living with the ways that you feel, connecting with the rest of the living world, which includes not just connecting with like moss and fish, but also with colleagues. And sometimes there's even professional development opportunities. So if you have the kind of job where you have like hours that you need to clock, sometimes you can get them related to this. Just as helping our students engage in climate action is important, so is engaging in climate action ourselves. And I want to pause here for 1 second to say, I know that everybody is very, very tired and is very, very busy and is living in 2025 and has a bad case of 2025 and is, you know, whatever kind of time you're having, you're sure having it. So I hear if there's a part of your brain that is now going, join with others who are engaged in climate action. When am I going to do that? But I know that all of you made time for this, and I salute you for that. And when you hear like, hey, go to a public hearing, and you're like, are you kidding me right now? Here's what I would recommend. I would recommend asking somebody who you love and trust and who loves and trusts you to help you make a little space and time in your life. You don't need to go it alone applies to all of the things that we've been talking about sharing emotion and acting together and connecting. It also applies to saying to somebody that you're close to, hey, can you watch the kids for me tonight so I can research this law that sounds good, but I don't really know. Thank you, Annalisa, for being here. We also wanted to flag a little bit that one of the things about not going it alone is there are actually people whose literal job is to help you out with this. School counselors, for example, can include climate emotions as a possibility when they're trying to find out what's going on with somebody. They can actually provide one-on-one counseling or groups, which as a teacher, you are really not able to do. That's not your job. It's not your training. You shouldn't have to do it. And there are people who can do it and are good at it. If somebody needs a break from a hard class discussion, or if somebody needs a climate career pathway, they can offer a referral for more serious treatment, and they can learn more about climate psychology in order to be able to do this part of their work with more care. School administrators, I don't know how many of you are at war with yours. I hope not that many. I hope they're good. Some things that they could do if they were willing to do a good job are all of the things that you see here. Support climate education, offer climate-related professional development, provide time for interdisciplinary planning. How cool would it be if you could talk to colleagues about how your classes might work together? Backing student climate leadership and budgeting for climate programming are also possibilities. Supporting climate-forward school policies. Could you weatherize your school? Could you put solar on the roof? Could you create a rain garden together? Could you equip your school to be climate resilient? So there's many pieces of this puzzle of putting together a more sustainable present as well as a more sustainable future. So we've got our, that's everything that we wanted to talk about. And we do have a few minutes for questions, which rules. I want to put the Educator's Guide, which is where this all comes from, in the chat one more time, but please, 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 what are your questions? What do you want to know?
Thank you very much, Kate and Carolyn. Really very exciting and very exciting to see all the interaction with the chat. So I'll just say what I put in the chat, which is we will send everybody who we have the email address for the the presentation and the resources in the chat and the recording. So if you did not sign up with us officially, I've got the link from somebody else. Please send us your email address, put it in the chat so that Paula can copy that and make sure that we get this information to you. So go ahead if there are questions or comments, reactions.
I just actually wanted to add something about that last point, Kate, because thinking about school administrators and like students, there's the things that students learn, and then there's the, implicit curriculum, which is like how schools function and the decisions that schools make about what's important, what's not important. And schools can say one thing like, oh, we're green, we are eco, but the decisions they make, and students see this on a day-to-day basis, communicates everything to them about what the real priorities are. So I think, when we just going back to that issue of betrayal and anger at the people in charge, at the people who have power. You know, who are those people, and what are the ways that we can pressure them to do right by students? Because that's what's causing the eco anxiety among kids, is that the people in power aren't doing what's within their power to do. And you could look at it upon a national level, but it's taking place both, I go to my school board meetings, so you can see it happen there too. So all connected. Do people have questions, comments, rants? Feel free.
Thoughts on how
If-
you might use this in your own classrooms too.
Yeah, and if our any of our Fresno students would be willing to unmute and share their perspectives as students, I think that would be quite valuable for the rest of us as well. But there's no pressure to do so. I mean, it's up to you. This may be a group that it's one likes to use the chat as their way of communicating, which is fine because we've had a very active conversation in the chat. So
Oh, Ruthie has a question. Broad resources to help kids learn about big issues are everywhere. It would be great to teach students about successes and fights in their local community. How can teachers get linked into that? That's a beautiful question. I love this question. It's so good. Unfortunately, the answer is kind of a pain in the butt because what you have to do often, sometimes there is. Sometimes there's a local environmental group. It really depends where you are. So you can search terms on the internet like your county plus environmental justice plus sustainability. You can add those terms into your search bar and see what you come up with. And you may come up with a number of organizations or a number of campaigns. You can find like, maybe it's just like 3 guys who go to every city council meeting. But you can find those people and they will often have a little bit of information for you on what's going on. But often you do have to piece it together yourself. And so kind of depending on the age of your students, you might try reaching out to the local Audubon, if there is one. They're doing a lot of good like climate and land stewardship stuff. You might look at any work that's going on with local indigenous tribes or nations. What are some of the ways that people in those nations are trying to teach the people who live on their land about how best to live there? You could look at things like bill trackers in your state for bills for climate adaptation, bills for emissions mitigation. So because it can be kind of a pain in the butt, what I would actually recommend is that you get together with a few people to do it. I have an exercise in my book that's about this. It's about like forming like a little research crew, and you get together and you get some snacks and you all get your laptops out and you just start searching. Don't do it by yourself. It's boring and annoying. So that's what I would recommend is first look for groups. Yep, Nancy's got a good point there. Are there existing chapters of national groups in your area? Because those groups sometimes have ties with local issues that are local in particular to your state or to your
there
country.
is a group called Eco Adapt. I put them in the chat, and they have a map where you can actually mouse over and find adaptation activities in your community. I mean, it's on a national scale, so I'm not sure how deep they go in terms of particular communities, but there are particular projects that they have. Go ahead, Carolyn, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I just echo what Kate said. There's no one-stop shopping for this because there's millions of local actions that are happening. I would just say from the perspective of, someone who is engaged in my community is to develop relationships with people who are doing this work, develop relationships with your local environmental groups, who are your local activists. I was at, um, sorry, I knew my talk would not last a whole hour. I was at an event yesterday at the State House, and there were, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 different local organizations who were there. So you follow those organizations on social media, you make connections, in person, talking with those folks, say, hey, what's your next action? Or you kind of, if you can't get that involved, you follow what they're doing and you bring that back to your students. So I have Instagram for my environmental club. And with that Instagram, the kids are unfortunately not allowed to run it. So I follow all of these local environmental organizations and then I just repost their wins so that the kids who are involved, who are following us, can then see it. So I think it's a lot of relationship building. Um, and the more you do, the more you get involved, the more you sort of see this as a network of people locally who are all involved in taking action.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat, you can also make for older students, like middle or high school, you can make these things into a research project for them. Like you find it. You find the local actions, you find the things that are connected to the things that you want. And then that also doubles as an exercise in media literacy and responsible searching, which is great. And something that I think all of us could get better at. Other questions and thoughts that folks have? I noticed Scott was talking about figuring out where we have extra flexibility to help students without relying on formal systems. I know we have to go in a minute, but Scott, would you want to say another word about that? How does that look in practice?
Well, my situation may be a little bit different than working with K through 12 students, but the university I work at is huge. And it is often very difficult to find like organizational resources within it, especially as we've been under pressure to reduce like administrative overhead. So it can be worthwhile, and we found this in working with some of our transdisciplinary projects as well. It can be worthwhile just getting people together to talk about what they know is happening within the university. I guess kind of the same way that you might do if you were trying to figure out what was happening within like a city. We were having a conversation about this with one of my co-instructors a couple of days ago, but it's really disappointing that we don't have better internal communication for stuff like this. But I don't know, it seems like a lot of times taking action just works better if you know where the paths of action are, or like where the levers are that you can pull, but it's not obvious a lot of times. So just getting together and working that out, talking with people to find out like what's worked and what hasn't. And I agree with the getting students involved in that. Along with the other stuff that you've talked about, it's also like creating a group resource, like a group knowledge base, is also a great way for students to feel connected as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I was going for there, is I don't know, it's the taking action a lot of times feels more effective if you've taken some time to think about like what you're going to do and how it works in the organization that you're part of.
Something I want to add to that too, and this is something that I feel like I've been talking with people about with people a bunch lately, is generally speaking, invitation works better than accusation with peers. And sometimes it even works better if you're pulling up. Saying, come and do this thing with me is more likely to get what you want to have happen, and then 2 people are at the thing, than if you're like, why aren't you doing blah, 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 blah? Even if that's what you're saying inside your heart. Nobody knows what's inside your heart. They only know what you say. So invite someone to come to the town meeting with you. Invite someone to come to the protest with you. make it an invitation into being active in this work. And that's something that we can extend to our students as well. How do we invite them into being effective in these realms? Accuse elected officials all you want, they deserve it. It's fine.
Well, that's a good note to end on, I think. So thank you again very much, Carolyn and Kate. And I think, the fact that we still have about 3/4 of the people are still here after time. So thank you all for being with us again. If you want the recordings and stuff, make sure that we have your email address, and we will send you follow-up materials. And we also invite you to do something during Worldwide Climate and Justice Education Week. We will have some online programs, hopefully including on some of the climate emotions work that you can participate in, but organize something with your class, with your community, and just be with us. So thank you all.
Thank you.